Hi, I'm Tamsin. They tied me to a post, yes, literally, at my own family reunion. Called me trash in front of everyone. And the worst part? I paid for the event. Every plate, every flower, every light on that lawn. They never saw me until the man they didn't know was my husband showed up. You ever wonder what it feels like to be erased by the people who raised you? Stick around, because this story doesn't end in silence. I wasn't expecting anything when I checked the mailbox. Just the usual flyers, maybe another insurance ad stuffed in glossy paper. But there it was, an envelope, thick and elegant, with the Ashcroft family crest embossed in gold on the flap. My pulse skipped, then steadied. I hadn't seen that symbol in nearly a decade, and even now, it didn't bring warmth, just memory. The front didn't say my name, not Tamsin Hale, not even the name I was born with. It read, "To the one who once carried the Ashcroft name." I turned it over in my hand slowly, letting the weight of that phrase settle. No note, no signature, just instructions for a family legacy gathering in Charleston. Dress code, formal Southern elegance. RSVP requested, but clearly not expected. They knew I wouldn't say no, not because I cared, but because they were daring me to show up. I scrolled through the family WhatsApp group later that evening, a thread that hadn't seen my number in years. They didn't bother to remove me, but no one ever spoke to me directly. Aunts confirming potluck dishes, cousins bragging about careers, Odessa listing the seating chart, every name carefully tagged. Mine absent, as if I were watching a show I'd once been cast in, but had since been written out of. They don't know who I've become, I murmured to myself. Or worse, they do, and they've decided I'm not worth naming. I booked my ticket to Charleston anyway. It had been 8 years since I last set foot on the family estate. The driveway still curled like a question mark, lined with perfectly trimmed boxwoods. The house stood just as grand, white columns and wraparound porches. The kind of Southern charm people imagined was built on grace, not guilt. A valet took my suitcase without looking at me. The staff wore crisp uniforms, just like always. Familiar faces who'd learned long ago not to greet me unless prompted. I walked slowly, like someone crossing a stage they hadn't rehearsed for. Odessa appeared at the top of the steps. Her dress was ivory with lace sleeves, the kind that said Southern Belle, with a smirk. She smiled when she saw me, not kindly, just politely enough. "Oh, you came," she said, voice light. "Brave?" Before I could respond, she gestured toward the side patio. "You can take that seat. It's out of the way, but it's still technically part of the event." I followed her gaze and saw it. One lone folding chair next to the portable restroom, half in the shade, half forgotten. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just sat down. That had always been my role in this family. To be there, but not be seen. The reunion prep was already in full swing. I watched Odessa micromanage flower arrangements and direct staff like a pageant queen. A small stage had been set up near the fountain, lights positioned just so. Everyone buzzed around her. No one glanced at me. Every Ashcroft child had their own engraved name card at the dinner table, except me. Mine was a handwritten slip of printer paper that said, "TH, guest." Not even the decency of a full name. I approached Odessa near the catering tent, held the card lightly between two fingers. "Is there a change to the seating?" I asked. She looked at it, then at me. "Honestly, we weren't sure you'd show. Didn't want to waste a place setting." She said it so easily, like she was discussing napkin colors, then turned to answer a florist's question before I could say anything else. I walked back to the folding chair, sat down again, let the paper card sit in my lap like a joke I wasn't meant to understand. The last time I was at this table, 8 years ago, I brought my own bottle of wine. I thought it would be a nice gesture. They laughed, said it didn't fit the tone, and poured it out. I told myself I left on my own terms back then, that I had nothing to prove, that I didn't need their validation. But as I sat there now, nameless and positioned like overflow staff, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit. A part of me had always hoped they'd one day be proud to see me return. Not because I'd earned their respect, I had that on my own, but because I wanted to believe that family meant something more than optics, that maybe, just maybe, there'd be a space for me again, one that wasn't conditional, but maybe I was never meant to belong here. And this time, I'm not pretending I do. As the breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle through the open corridor, I stepped into the upstairs hallway of the estate. The light filtering through the curtains was warm, forgiving even, but nothing about the air in that house felt forgiving. Verlene was already waiting near the guest room. She didn't knock, just opened the door and laid something on the bed. I stayed quiet. She turned toward me, smoothing out a beige linen dress. "All the women are wearing neutrals," she said. "This will help you match. We don't want anyone standing out for the wrong reasons." Her voice never changed pitch, never hesitated. She wasn't offering, she was issuing a polite instruction. I picked up the dress. The tags had been removed. The size was exactly right, like she'd checked without asking. I pressed my fingers into the fabric. Expensive, soft, carefully chosen. Not for beauty, for blending. I folded it back into thirds and returned it to the drawer. She didn't ask why. I didn't explain. When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the door for a while, just listening. The hallway murmurs, the occasional laugh, a clink of glass. All familiar. All staged. Downstairs, the reunion reception had begun. I made my way toward the side lawn where the event team was prepping. Just outside the catering tent, I paused to watch a young man adjust a table setting. He glanced up, gave me a short nod, then, thinking I was part of the service staff, handed me a silver tray of champagne flutes. "Be careful," he said casually. "They like the stems facing right." Before I could speak, someone behind me chuckled. I turned slightly and met the gaze of one of my father's cousins. Philip, maybe? He looked like money made flesh, hair still thick at 60, teeth bright as a realtor's billboard. "I didn't know they let the help mingle this year," he said, swirling his drink with a smirk. "Guess it's part of the charm." I didn't respond. I placed the tray back on the table and kept walking. There was nothing new about being mistaken for someone paid to serve. What stuck wasn't the words. It was the comfort with which he said them. Like I had no right to correct him. Back inside, I drifted toward the back kitchen, where it was quieter. I needed to think, to breathe. The kitchen smelled like citrus and wood polish. A tray of deviled eggs sat untouched on the counter. I stood there, hands in my pockets, when Odessa walked in. She took one look at me, still in my travel clothes, not in the beige dress, and let out a sharp sigh. "You always make everything harder than it needs to be," she said, stepping over to the fridge for a bottle of sparkling water. "You say you want to be accepted, but you don't even try to meet us halfway." I didn't bother turning to face her. "Meeting you halfway only works if the road runs both directions." She gave a soft laugh, the kind that hides irritation. "It's a family gathering, Tamsin, not a protest." I didn't argue. I'd learned that silence unsettles people more than shouting ever could. She left with her drink, heels tapping out judgment as she went. Later, I found a quiet spot near the staircase and leaned against the railing, staring down at the main room filling up with laughter and wine. I watched people I'd known since childhood hug like strangers playing happy. Everyone polished, groomed, curated, everyone playing their part in the production. A flash of memory surfaced, uninvited. I was 19 at the last summer reunion I'd attended. It was peak heat, and I'd volunteered to help carry chairs to the far side of the lawn. No one asked, I just did it. I poured drinks, set up place cards. I remember asking Verlene if I could be included in the event program, just a small note under contributing family. She had smiled and said, "We don't list everyone. Otherwise, it becomes a participation trophy." Back then, I'd accepted it as logistics. But now, I knew better. It wasn't logistics. It was a lesson. A lesson in how to be useful, but not visible. How to contribute, but never be credited. How to show up, but not take up space. By the time the lights dimmed and the final seating arrangements were being finalized, I was still the one without a real chair. Some things don't change, and some things change you. As I stood before the mirror in my room, I looked at the dress one more time, still folded neatly where I'd left it. My reflection stared back, same face, different eyes. If blending in is the price to belong, I whispered, maybe I was never meant to. I stepped back from the mirror and drew the curtains, leaving the room dim. A quiet settled over me. Not peace, just the kind of stillness you get when your voice has nowhere to go. I didn't bother putting on the dress. I just changed into something clean and walked down the hallway, heels muffled by the carpet, heart beating steady. Not fast, just deliberate. The dinner was set in the long banquet hall, candlelit tables stretching farther than necessary. People were already seated, laughter rolling low like background music, the type reserved for people used to wearing masks. I found a chair that wasn't mine, but also wasn't marked as anyone else's, and I sat down without asking permission. A string quartet played something soft and non-committal. Then the lights dimmed further, and Odessa took the microphone. "Tonight," she began, "we look back on 6 decades of legacy, of family, of love that lasts through time and trial." The projector screen came to life behind her. I stiffened. Photo after photo flickered across the room. Slides of my siblings as toddlers, family vacations in Hilton Head, holiday dinners with people smiling for cameras. Every face I recognized, every year accounted for. Except mine. One shot stopped me cold. The 2009 Lake House reunion. There we were. Well, they were. Standing in a row, arms looped around each other. I remembered standing there that day. I remembered where I stood, who I stood next to. And in that picture, there was a space between my brother and cousin. A space wide enough for one more person, yet empty. It wasn't an accident. Odessa leaned over from her place at the front table, whispered across a wine glass like a joke. "Maybe you blinked. Or maybe I was never in it to begin with." I didn't blink. I didn't move. I let the slideshow finish. Another wedding, another scholarship award, another curated life I was supposed to admire. Applause followed. I didn't join in. As the lights brightened and people began standing to refill drinks, a cousin I vaguely remembered approached me. Not the cruel kind, just clueless. "You didn't go to law school, right?" she asked, tilting her head. "That's probably why they didn't list your stuff. They tried to keep it career-aligned." She smiled like she just explained something helpful. I smiled back with every muscle in my face and said nothing. They hadn't forgotten. They'd edited. Later, I slipped outside into the garden. The night air was thick with humidity and magnolia. Small clusters of guests posed for photos under the Ashcroft family crest, hanging from a trellis. I stood far enough back that I wouldn't accidentally be captured. The grass was cool under my heels. I curled my toes inside my shoes and focused on the sky. My hands still trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from holding in too much for too long. I didn't feel sadness, just clarity. They'd erased me not because I failed. They erased me because I didn't fit the version of success they'd agreed upon behind closed doors. I didn't go to the right schools. I didn't marry the right last name. I didn't wear the dress. But I remembered every rent check I paid on my own. Every shift I worked double so I could cover tuition. I remembered sitting in a laundromat in Savannah at 20, folding my work shirt while waiting for a callback from the bursar's office. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, we can't extend it any further. If the balance isn't cleared by Friday, you'll be withdrawn." I hung up, stared at the cracked tile on the floor, and pulled out the last $200 in my account. I didn't cry. I found a way. That was my education, not theory, but survival. Independence is always romantic in books. In real life, it's just expensive, and quiet, and unforgiving. Back in the garden, I leaned against a low brick wall while a small group giggled over a toast. Odessa posed with her husband under fairy lights. My father clapped someone on the back and handed over a scotch. My mother gestured toward the caterer, as if the timing of the crab cakes personally offended her. They were all exactly who I remembered. And somehow, worse. They edited me out of their story. But I wrote one they'll never be part of. As Odessa lifted her glass for the official toast, her voice rising over the crowd, I turned away. Not to cry, but to breathe. I took a few slow steps away from the garden wall, the grass whispering beneath my heels, and circled toward the front lawn. The laughter had started to fade, replaced by the sound of microphones being tested and camera shutters clicking in the distance. I didn't need a program to know what came next. They were shifting gears, from nostalgia to performance. A white tent had been set up across the main lawn, flanked by glowing lanterns, and a rented backdrop with the Ashcroft crest in gold foil. It was designed to look like legacy, like honor stitched together through decades of tradition. What it really was? A carefully choreographed play. And this time, I wasn't just in the audience, I was part of the show. Odessa's voice rang out from under the spotlight. This next portion of the evening is something deeply personal, a symbol of how we endure, how we grow stronger through struggle. Several people turned their chairs to face the small wooden platform in the center. A podium stood in the middle, draped in ivory cloth, the family crest embroidered like a seal of approval. "We've chosen someone special tonight," Odessa continued, her tone sweetened like southern tea. "Someone who represents what it means to weather storms and emerge with grace." They didn't say my name. They didn't have to. I felt the crowd glance toward me, curious smiles and tilted heads. Someone from the staff gently guided me forward. I didn't resist. I wanted to see how far they were willing to take this. When I stepped up, Odessa met me with a ribbon. Deep burgundy, velvet, heavier than it looked. She wrapped it around my wrists, softly, deliberately. Not tight, but enough. Enough to say, "This is the role we've written for you." She smiled. "The one who endured," and kept silent. There was no warmth in it. Verlene gave a small nod from the front row. Flashbulbs went off. The audience clapped, lightly, awkwardly. A few guests leaned to whisper, maybe trying to decide if this was genuine or some avant-garde ritual. I stood there, hands loosely bound, heart steady but heavy. This wasn't a tribute, it was a reenactment. A reenactment of what they thought I owed them. They didn't want an apology. They wanted a performance. A story that painted them as graceful, generous. A redemption arc written in reverse. They wanted to use my presence as proof they were good people. And me? I was supposed to stand there and nod. After they unwrapped the ribbon, Odessa patted my arm and whispered, "You were always stronger than you gave yourself credit for." I didn't say a word, just walked off the platform. A few feet away, I spotted the dessert station. The place card marked with my name was there, except it wasn't. It said, Tammy H., in bold letters. A misspelling I hadn't gone by since middle school. Not even an attempt to get it right. I picked it up. Odessa was nearby, sipping from a glass of rosé. She shrugged. "You've changed your name so many times." "We guessed." She said it with a chuckle, like she was talking about someone trying on hats. Like my identity was just a rotating label. I didn't bother correcting her. I folded the card once, clean and slow, and slid it into my clutch. Instead of returning to the crowd, I slipped away toward the side hallway that led to the children's lounge, a quiet place that rarely saw adult footsteps during events like this. Inside, Elodie was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, coloring a family tree diagram. The paper had Ashcroft branches drawn in pencil, names lightly inked in. Hers was there. So was Odessa's. My name was missing. When she saw me, she smiled wide. "Hi, Aunt Tamsin." I sat beside her. She leaned closer. "Is it true you left because you didn't like the rules?" I hesitated. "Who told you that?" "Mom. She said you got in trouble a lot, but she forgave you." The words stung more than I expected. Not because of what they were, but because of what they erased. I picked up a colored pencil and began adding a name onto the tree. Mine. Sometimes, I said gently, people tell stories because it's easier than admitting they didn't listen. She blinked at me, curious. Not angry, just learning. She nodded and went back to coloring. I sat there a while longer. The air smelled like crayons and juice boxes. Innocence always does. When I stood up, I took the folded name card from my clutch and placed it on the shelf near the door. I didn't want it anymore, but I wanted it to be seen. Back in the hallway, I passed by the guest coat area. The beige dress from earlier was still hanging on its hook, untouched. I reached out and ran my finger across the sleeve once, then let it go. I pulled out my phone and texted Corwin. It's happening. They turned it into a pageant. I'm staying, but not to clap. The applause started inside. I stood outside the door and listened, not as a daughter, but as a witness. The applause inside grew louder, measured, polite, the kind that's practiced. I turned away from the door and took the long way around the house, past the columns wrapped in twinkle lights, past the caterers clearing plates with the same mechanical grace I used to carry myself in this family. I followed the back path that curved toward the ballroom entrance. Once inside, the shift in temperature hit me immediately. Cooler air, brighter chandeliers, and the weight of people watching each other more than listening. The dining hall had been rearranged with precision. Every napkin folded identically, every centerpiece a curated echo of tradition. I found the stage manager near the back wall, flipping through a clipboard. "Hi," I said evenly. "I just wanted to check. My speaking slot should be right before the Ashcroft Foundation toast. I submitted it 3 weeks ago through the family liaison." She smiled politely, scanning the list. I'm not seeing your name here." I was about to clarify when Odessa appeared behind her, stepping in like she'd been waiting for her cue. "Oh, we revised the program," she said, her tone sugary. "For flow. You're not on anymore. We decided it was better for consistency." She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. That's how people behave when they expect you to understand your place without a scene. "It's not personal," she added, before turning on her heel and disappearing behind the velvet curtain. Of course it was personal. That line is always the opener to a slap without fingerprints. I turned and walked toward the exit, hands relaxed at my sides. Not clenched, just empty. Outside, the night had settled thick. I moved past a cluster of guests near the buffet tent. 2 distant cousins, Marcus and Reed, if I remembered right, were hovering near the drink station, talking low, but not low enough. "That new tech company, Race Atlas," one of them said. "The founder's name came up on Bloomberg. Can't remember it. Something Eastern sounding. Brilliant, though." "Not from Charleston, I'll tell you that," the other added with a laugh. "Definitely not Ashcroft material." I didn't stop walking. I didn't interrupt. I just kept moving and smiled to myself, because Rice Atlas was mine. They'd already shaken my hand at registration, already eaten hors d'oeuvres paid for by a company they couldn't even pronounce, because I hadn't let them see it. They didn't ignore my accomplishments. They simply didn't expect them to belong to me. 3 years ago, I sat in a 1-bedroom apartment in Seattle with Corwin. The night was cold and our heat was uneven. We were eating Thai takeout on the floor because our only table was covered in pitch decks and loan applications. I'd just lost a funding round that I thought was locked. Corwin had just paid the lease on a space I wasn't sure I could fill. I remember saying, "If I ever get to the point where I can help this family and they still don't invite me to the table, I won't knock. I'll build my own." And now, standing on grass I paid to fertilize, under a tent that bore my silent sponsorship, I realized I had. I never needed their platform. I was already on mine. Back inside, the final toasts were beginning. Odessa took the mic, all poise and practiced posture. I didn't wait for her to finish. I circled the edge of the room, skirt brushing the floor, as I moved between servers and guests, just out of view. They didn't let me speak. but they were happy to speak on my behalf. I paused just inside the perimeter of the main room, lifted my chin, and said, quietly, clearly, just once, "If this family doesn't stop confusing silence with grace, I will make sure the next generation learns the difference." No one turned, no one reacted, but I knew they heard me. I stepped into the garden, past the cameras, past the smiles, past the version of me they kept trying to rewrite. And this time, I didn't wait for a thank you. I left the room they tried to mute me in, and entered the world I made without them. I stepped deeper into the garden path, letting the applause fade behind me, like a song I'd already heard too many times. My heels crunched lightly on gravel as I circled around the back of the lawn toward the side entrance of the main tent. The air had cooled, but the weight in my chest hadn't lifted. Not yet. The tribute performance was about to begin. I hovered at the edge of the crowd, just far enough to avoid drawing attention, but close enough to hear Odessa step up to the microphone with her usual poise. "We want to take a moment," she said, voice smooth as ever, "to recognize resilience, quiet strength, family that endures, even when things get hard." I could already feel the shift. The lights dimmed to a soft golden hue. A soft instrumental version of a hymn hummed beneath her words. I knew that song. My mother used to play it on Sundays while polishing silver, always humming under her breath. It had never sounded so manufactured. "The decorations you see tonight," Odessa continued, "the beauty, the intention, none of it would have been possible without the generosity of our anonymous benefactors. You know who you are, and we thank you." Anonymous benefactor. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. I whispered under my breath. I bought the chairs they sit in. I bought the champagne they toast with. And still, I'm the ghost in the garden. The applause rolled again. I stood still. A few minutes later, Verlini took the stage. She looked radiant in her pearl-lined gown, one hand holding a delicate note card, the other gesturing with practiced humility. "We believe in learning from the past," she said. "And tonight, we celebrate the journey of growth. Forgiveness. Humility." She turned to me, her voice softening. "And tonight, we honor that journey with a symbol of resilience." Before I could process what was happening, two young cousins, barely teenagers, wide-eyed and eager, approached me. One held a length of deep red velvet. They didn't ask. They simply reached for my hands. I let them. The fabric was familiar. Too familiar. I recognized the stitching. This was custom work from a boutique I used to invest in, back before the board quietly edged me out, and Odessa's name somehow appeared on the shareholder list instead of mine. I felt the velvet wrap gently around my wrists. Not tight, not rough, but real. Camera flashes sparkled. A few guests clapped, confused, then followed the lead of those who nodded solemnly as if this was a sacred rite. Verlene beamed like a monarch presenting a gift to the nation. The photographer leaned in, one flash after another. They had tied me up in a ritual I paid for, a performance I hadn't been asked to join, but couldn't refuse. I stood there for a full 30 seconds before one of the cousins leaned forward to untie me. I stepped down from the platform without a word. I didn't need to make a scene. They'd already written one for me. Later, flipping through the printed event program near the dessert table, I saw my name nowhere. Instead, under evening contributors, Odessa's name stood alone. Beside it, lead creative director, major donor. Under the line marked legacy supporters, Verlene Ashcroft, vision and legacy T. Hale, sponsor in kind. Written in parenthesis. Lowercase, no bold, no recognition. They'd taken everything, not by force, but by formality. I turned to see Verlene at the head table, swirling a glass of Merlot, face relaxed like a woman who had just sealed a business deal and then blessed it with prayer. She glanced in my direction and raised the glass. Not to toast me, but to herself. I left the program folded on the table and walked toward the lawn's edge, just past the main lighting. I took off the ribbon still in my hand. I didn't drop it. I folded it in half and slid it into my coat pocket. Not out of sentiment, out of proof. As I passed the hydrangea hedges, I felt her behind me before I heard her. Verlene. She approached quietly, as if this were a mother-daughter moment and not what it really was. A final cut. "I hope you know this wasn't easy for any of us," she said. I didn't reply. She took a breath. "You were never meant to be our burden. You were an accident your father couldn't refuse." I turned my head just enough to see her face. Calm, controlled, pitying. She didn't wait for a response. She adjusted her shawl and turned away like she'd done me a favor. I stayed where I was, letting her walk off, heels clicking back toward the curated safety of the celebration. I used to wonder if they just didn't know how to love me. But this wasn't ignorance. It was a decision. They wrapped me in symbols of apology and called it tradition. But what they really wanted was a scapegoat with a silent mouth. I didn't move when she left. I stayed at the edge of the platform, the velvet rope that had just been removed, now curled like a shedskin near my feet. The lights had softened to that flattering gold they reserved for photo ops, and Odessa had returned to the microphone for her grand finale. She was thanking the guests, the committee, the unnamed sponsors, always unnamed, as if generosity only counted when it left no fingerprint. The crowd began settling back into their seats. Plates clinked, conversations restarted, and just as Odessa raised her champagne flute, the sound came. A low, smooth hum of an engine. Not rushed, not flashy, controlled. It was the kind of sound that silences a room before the mind can even process why. The valet by the gate took 2 uncertain steps forward. Odessa faltered mid-sentence. Even Verlene, who had worn that perfect smile all night, paused with her fingers halfway to her pearls. The black SUV pulled into view slowly, its headlights cutting across the lawn in long, deliberate sweeps. No one recognized it. It didn't belong to any of the board members or out-of-town relatives. It was foreign, not in make, but in intent. The door opened, and Corwin stepped out. He didn't speak. He didn't adjust his tie. He simply closed the door behind him, walked the short stretch from the driveway to the center of the lawn, and stopped 3 feet from the microphone. You could feel it. The shift. Every eye turned to him like iron to magnet. "Step back," he said to the staffer still standing near the podium. "You've said enough tonight." The poor man, some part-time event assistant, froze, glanced toward Odessa, then stepped aside. Corwin looked at me, not for confirmation, for alignment. Then he reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thin leather folder, opened it slowly, held up the first page like he was testifying in court. "I have a list," he said calmly, "of every invoice tied to this evening. Caterers, stage rentals, flowers, tents, lighting, paid in full, through a company owned entirely by my wife." He didn't look at Odessa when he said it, but she let out a small gasp anyway. A single pearl from her necklace slipped loose and landed with a quiet tick on the stone beneath her heels. Corwin kept speaking. "You thanked anonymous donors. You handed credit to people who contributed nothing but their names. And you did it while tying the one person who paid for all of it to a stage, like she was your redemption." He turned to Merrick, who had already begun to rise from his chair, face pale. "And you," Corwin said, softer now, almost sad. "You accepted those transfers month after month. Mortgage saved, foundation bailout, private school tuition, all labeled from RA partners. You thought it was me? No, it was her, because she didn't want you to lose your home." The room was still, airless. Verlene opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted from Corwin to me, searching for a way to control the narrative, for something to reach for. But there was nothing left within reach. Odessa finally found her voice. "We didn't know," Corwin raised a hand. "That's the problem. You didn't know because you didn't ask. And because she never asked for credit, You assumed she didn't deserve any. Then, quieter, but sharp enough to cut through the night. You used her to make yourselves feel generous. That ends now. He turned to me. My voice didn't tremble when I said, I'm not funding another memory I'm erased from. Someone in the crowd clapped, once, then stopped, as if realizing this wasn't their moment to participate. We didn't linger. Corwin placed the folder on the podium and stepped aside so I could walk forward. I didn't thank anyone. I didn't smile. I just looked at the room. Every face, every relative, every lie. And then I turned toward the exit. We didn't go far, just to the garden's edge. That same gravel path I'd walked a dozen times during childhood, usually when told to cool off or stop making everything about you. Now the path felt earned. Later that night, back at the hotel, I scrolled through social media. Verlene had already posted a photo. Odessa stood beside the stage, smiling like nothing had happened. The caption read, "Tonight we healed, family first, always." I wasn't in the photo. Of course not. The comments flooded in. So beautiful! What a perfect event! Ashcroft class, as always. I didn't comment. I took a screenshot, saved it to a folder I'd labeled Revisionist History, and shut my phone. That's what they do best. Rewrite the ending while the ink's still wet. Morning seeped into the room slowly, one shade of gray at a time. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in the clothes from last night. The phone beside me pulsed with new messages, its vibration a rhythm I no longer danced to. At first, the notifications trickled in. 1 missed call from Merrick, 2 from Verlene, then Odessa. Then one of the family board members I hadn't spoken to since they handed me a patronizing "thank you for your donation" card 5 years ago. I didn't answer any of them. The voicemails played themselves automatically. I heard Verlene's voice first. "We need to discuss what happened last night. That was not the time or place." Then Merrick, sounding more irritated than ashamed. "We're unclear where the escrow balance landed. There's confusion about the third-party contributions." Finally, Odessa, clipped and defensive. "If this is about what Mom said, don't punish everyone for her tone." I held the phone in my hand, not like a weapon, more like evidence. Now that the ribbon had come off, they were finally feeling the weight they used to tie me down. By 9 a.m., I had packed my things. I called the front desk to request my belongings from the estate, only to be met with that tone I knew too well. Fake helpfulness wrapped in protocol. "Ma'am, your room was reassigned. Your items were left with the concierge. A single box. Labeled, Tammy Hale?" I didn't correct her. I just said thank you and made my way down. The box was duct-taped lazily. I didn't open it. I carried it like a prop from a play that had closed early. In the lobby, no one made eye contact. Not the valet, not the receptionist. That was fine. I had looked for their eyes long enough. By noon, I was back in Seattle. Corwin picked me up at the terminal, but we didn't speak until we were home. No small talk, no rehashing. Just the silence that happens between people who have nothing to prove to each other anymore. In my home office, I sat down with a cup of coffee and opened the drawer marked Ashcroft. The file inside was labeled Contributions 2015-2024. Thick, neatly organized. I didn't need to look twice. Page 1, $38,000. Elodie's tuition after Odessa's trust froze due to accounting oversight. Page 2, $72,000. Estate tax penalties covered to prevent public liens. Page 3, $115,000. The silent bailout of Odessa's media project, which she announced at the reunion 2 years ago as self-funded. Final page, $99,000. Logistics, staffing, and overhead for the reunion itself, processed through RA Partners LLC. I didn't feel rage. I felt finished. I opened my email and began typing. 2. Family, ashcroftfoundation.org. Subject, Final Contribution Statement. Over the past 9 years, I've contributed $324 toward family-related expenses and emergency coverage. I did so privately, not anonymously. Effective immediately, all contributions are ceased. This is not open for discussion or renegotiation. All access to my LLC's accounts has been revoked. Any remaining balances are now your responsibility. I attached a PDF summary, clicked send, then deleted the entire thread chain from my inbox. The next 10 minutes were still, almost hauntingly so. No calls, no emails, just stillness. I walked out to the rooftop balcony and sat down. Seattle's sky had that washed-out tone I used to hate, but right then, it felt honest. Not pretending to be blue. Just real. Corwin brought out tea and sat beside me. We didn't fill the silence. We let it hold us. The wind rustled through a potted fern I'd forgotten to water. A plane passed overhead. I could hear a dog barking from 2 floors below. And my chest? It didn't feel tight anymore. I looked down at the wedding band on my hand. Thin, simple, and paid for with shared groceries and startup setbacks. Not gold bought from legacy, just a circle we chose. If love has to be purchased, it was never mine to keep. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel heavy. I just breathed. An hour later, as I rinsed my mug in the kitchen, my phone buzzed once. Just one notification. Not a call, a message, from Elodie. Just 2 lines. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? I read it twice. And for the first time since I'd stepped into that reunion, I smiled. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, phone still in hand, Elodie's message glowing quietly on the screen. Just 2 lines. That was all it took to unravel what days of performance and years of silence hadn't. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked to the window, watching the light shift through the blinds. Morning in Seattle had its own rhythm. Muted colors, scattered seagulls, the hum of buses gliding over damp pavement. I watched, unhurried, until the kettle whistled. After I poured the water, I returned to my desk and sat down. I opened my private inbox and typed slowly. 2, Elodie subject. Just checking. They didn't break me, that's enough for now. I hit send. I didn't reread it. In the stillness that followed, I looked around my home. Not the walls, not the furniture, but the corners. The places where memory tends to settle. For years, my space had quietly carried the weight of compromise. Plaques sent by the Ashcroft Foundation, awards never displayed, notes from reunions I never attended. I hadn't noticed how many were still within reach. I stood, walked over to the shelf near the entryway, and pulled out a wooden box. Inside, a brass plate bearing my full name, Tamsin Ashcroft, gifted to me after an internship no one had wanted me to apply for, then used to claim the family encouraged independence. I closed the box, taped it shut, and placed it by the door. I'd drop it off at a donation center after lunch. It wasn't about bitterness, just space, making room for something that hadn't been allowed before. The sun climbed a little higher, cutting across the floor in a perfect line that reached toward my office. I walked down the hallway and opened the door to the mentoring space I'd created over the last year. It wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. 3 chairs, a table with journals and mugs, a corkboard filled with quiet victories, emails, sketches, letters. On the wall above the doorway was a quote I'd printed on thick cardstock and framed myself. Your silence was survival, but your voice is your return. That space had saved me more than once. I'd listened to women talk about being cast out, being told they were ungrateful, too bold, too emotional. I never told them my full story. I didn't need to. They recognized the fragments in my eyes, and I recognized theirs. That afternoon, the chairs filled. A woman named Sarah spoke first. She talked about being the youngest in a family that only spoke when they needed money. Another, Deja, shared about leaving a church that used her past as a warning to others. None of them asked for sympathy. They asked for breath. And that day, they got it. I didn't offer advice. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. After the session ended, I cleaned up slowly. Corwin arrived with lunch, a paper bag filled with grilled chicken salads and 2 bottles of sparkling water. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. We sat on the patio behind the mentoring space. The bench creaked softly as he settled in beside me. The breeze tugged gently at the edge of the tablecloth. I reached for his hand, not out of need, but out of thanks. No one called. No one came. Peace isn't quiet because nothing is happening. It's quiet because no one's trying to convince you that you owe them your place at the table. Later that week, I repotted a small plant I'd grown from a cutting taken off the Ashcroft estate years ago. I'd almost forgotten about it. It had been sickly, barely hanging on in the first few months. But now, it had full green leaves and a stubborn bend in its stem, like it had learned to reach for sunlight from somewhere else. As I placed it on the balcony, I stood for a moment in the soft shade. They built a legacy by silencing people like me. I'll build mine by helping them speak. Not every ending needs an apology. Some just need a beginning that's finally mine. Before we close, let me say this. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. I didn't share it for pity or to stir old wounds, but because I know I'm not the only one who's ever been written out of a story they helped build. If you've ever been the quiet one in your family, the one who gave without recognition, the one who was expected to be grateful for scraps while others dined on your effort, know this. Silence doesn't make you weak. It makes you observant. And eventually, it makes you powerful. What I learned is that you don't need applause to matter. You don't need a title to lead. And you certainly don't need permission to walk away from people who only show up when they need something. Sometimes, choosing peace over performance is the loudest decision you'll ever make. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Or the one expected to be the bigger person while others rewrite the truth? Tell me in the comments. Let's talk about it. If this story touched something in you, if even a line made you pause, drop a 1 in the comments or share where you're watching from. I'd love to know what part of the country or the world this story found its way to. And if it didn't land with you, that's okay too. Tell me why. I'm here to listen, not just to be heard. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and honest, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This channel is where we speak the quiet truths out loud. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next story.